Let me tell you something a guard is never supposed to do. He is never supposed to move. You can stand in front of one for an hour. You can laugh. You can wave your hand near his face. You can hold your child up beside him for a photograph. He will not blink at you. He will not look at you. He is a wall wearing a uniform, and that is the whole point of him. So when I tell you that on a gray morning in Aldrich, one of Her Majesty's guards left his post, walked out into the road, and put his hand up in front of the Queen's own car, you have to understand what that means. You have to feel it the way we felt it, standing there. That was the day everything at Fenmore changed, and I saw the whole thing. I was maybe 20 feet away, on my little stool with a brush in my hand. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Alden. I have shined boots on the same corner outside Fenmore Palace for 31 years. My father did it before me on that same stone. I have a wooden box, a low stool, 3 brushes worn soft as an old dog, and a spot of pavement the city has never once tried to take from me, because half the palace staff would riot if they did. People think I sell shine. I don't, not really. I sell a minute of sitting down. A tourist walks 100 streets in bad shoes and their feet are screaming, and they see an old man with a box and something in them just wants to sit. So they sit. And while they sit, I look at their shoes. That is my strange little habit, and I will confess it now so you don't think me mad later. I read people by their shoes, always have. I don't much look at faces. Faces lie all day long. A face will smile at you while the man behind it is thinking of murder. But shoes tell the truth. Shoes tell you where a person has been, how heavy they carry themselves, whether they are running towards something or dragging away from it. A rich man in cheap worn boots is a man who has lost his money and hasn't told his wife. A young woman in shoes a size too big is wearing her sister's, and she has a story. Soldiers walk from the heel, thieves walk from the toe, the grieving barely walk at all. I have been right more often than a man has any business being, so keep that in mind, because my shoes are going to matter before this is over. They mattered more than I ever wanted them to. Now that morning. It was autumn in Aldrich, the good kind, where the air has a little edge to it but the sun still means it. The plane trees along the Kingsway were dropping their leaves in slow spirals, and the street sweepers had given up fighting them and just let them lie. There is a smell to the city in that season, wet stone, chestnuts roasting 3 corners down, horse from the guard mews, and under it all the cold, clean smell of the river. If you have ever stood outside Fenmore in October, you know exactly the smell I mean. And if you haven't, I am sorry, because it is one of the good things in this world. The tourists were out in their crowds. They always are. Fenmore is the oldest working palace in Verwyn, and people come from everywhere to stand at the black iron railings and stare through at the guards. The guards stand in 2 boxes at the front of the palace, one either side of the great gate, and they change over 4 times a day with all the drums and the boots, and the shouting the visitors love so much. The tourists press up to the fence with their little cameras. The children make faces. Somebody's grandmother always tries to talk to the guards as if they might just answer her if she is polite enough. They never answer, that's the deal. Discipline, stillness. It's the whole reason people come. I had 2 customers that morning before it happened. First, a fat, cheerful man from somewhere south, boots good, wallet loose, tipped me double and called me sir. Nice fellow. His shoes said he'd never been hungry a day in his life and had made peace with it. Then a young couple on their honeymoon by the newness of their rings and the newness of their shoes, she in white sandals already ruined by the walking, he pretending his feet didn't hurt to impress her. Sweet. I shined his once over and told her to make him buy her a coffee and sit. She laughed. He looked grateful to me forever. And that is when I first noticed the guard. Now I know all of them, not to speak to. Guards don't speak to bootblacks and I wouldn't want them to, but I know them by their boots. I have watched 100 young men come through that gate, do their 2 years and go. I have watched their boots. And there was one who had joined maybe 8 months before, a young one, and his boots were the best-kept pair I had ever seen in 31 years on that corner. I want you to understand what I mean by that. Every guard's boots are polished, it's the law of the place, but most are polished the way a chore is done well enough, quick enough, done. This young one's boots were polished the way a man prays. You could have shaved in them, and it wasn't vanity because vanity shines the toe and forgets the heel. He shone the heel. He shone the part no visitor ever sees. That told me everything. That was a young man who did the work when nobody was watching, which is the only work that means anything. I never knew his name that morning. I learned it later, Corporal Tobias Wren. But that day he was just the careful one to me, the boy with the honest boots. And he was in the left box, by the gate, on duty, still as the stone behind him. Except, he wasn't quite still. Here is a thing you learn on a corner over 31 years. You learn what still looks like, real still. And this boy, this careful boy, was not quite giving it to me. It was small. So small I doubt one other soul in that whole crowd caught it. But his head, his eyes, really only the eyes, the head never moved, his eyes kept going to one place. Down the railing, to the right, down toward the far corner of the palace forecourt where the service road came out, where the cars come and go. Once I thought was nothing, a fly, a trick of my old sight. Twice I sat up a little on my stool. By the fourth time I had put my brush down in my lap and I was watching that boy the way I watch shoes. Because something was pulling at him, something down that road, and a guard whose whole entire job is to look at nothing does not keep looking at one particular something unless that something is very, very wrong. I followed his line. I couldn't see much from where I sat. The service gate, the little booth, the black cars parked in their row waiting for whoever they wait for. A driver leaning on one, smoking. Nothing. But he saw something. I would bet my box on it, and whatever it was eating him alive to stand still and do nothing about it. I have thought about that moment 1,000 times since. The boy fighting himself. Duty on one side saying do not move, do not ever move, that is the one thing, and on the other side something I couldn't see pulling. The bells rang the quarter hour. The tourists shuffled. The honeymoon boy came back with a coffee for his wife, and I gave them both a wink. The chestnut smell rolled up the street. An ordinary morning in Aldrich, the kind I've had 10,000 of. And then the great doors of the palace opened. You could feel the crowd change. They always know. Some ripple goes through the fence line when a real royal thing is about to happen. Cameras came up. People pressed in. A palace man in a gray suit came out first and stood by the steps, all business, and then 2 more behind him, and everybody at the railing started saying the same word to each other in 20 languages. The Queen, is it the Queen? It was the Queen. Queen Elowen of Verwyn, come out on her own front steps in a deep blue coat with a scarf against the October air, moving the way she moves, not fast, never fast, but certain, like the ground had agreed to be there for her. She had somewhere to be. There was a lunch, I heard afterward, out at the old hospital she'd opened 40 years before. Ordinary royal business. Get in the car, ride across the city, cut a ribbon, come home. The lead car pulled around from the row. Long, black, polished till the sky lived in it. It came around slow and stopped at the foot of the steps, and the driver got out to open her door, and the whole crowd was holding one long breath, and the cameras were going like a field of crickets. And I looked back at my careful boy in the left box. He was not looking at the Queen. Every human being on that street was looking at the Queen, except him. His eyes had gone to that car, to the wheels of that car, and his face, I will never forget his face, because a guard's face is nothing. A guard's face is a closed door, and for 1/2 of 1 second that door blew wide open, and what was behind it was pure animal fear. Then the car began to move. It rolled forward off the steps, gentle, the Queen inside. Curving toward the great gate, toward the road, toward us, toward where I sat with my brush frozen in my hand. And the careful boy came out of his box. I heard it before I understood it. A shout. One word torn out of a throat that had been silent for hours. Stop. He was already running. He had thrown down 200 years of every rule that made him what he was, and he was running at the moving car, and he got in front of it with his hand up flat, and his whole body braced like he meant to stop 2 tons of steel with the bones in his arm. The car jerked, brakes, a driver's face white behind the glass. And the whole world stood still. I was on my feet. I don't remember standing. My box tipped over and my brushes went across the stone and I didn't care. Nobody moved. 200 people at the railings and not one of them made a sound because a royal guard was standing in front of the Queen's car with his hand up in terror on his face, and none of us, not one, had any idea yet what he had seen. The palace man in gray was already coming down the steps at a run, his face gone from calm to fury in 3 strides, and I could hear him even from where I stood, hissing the boy's name like a whip. Corporal Wren, stand down. The boy did not stand down. He dropped. He went down flat onto the road, onto his belly in that spotless uniform, and he put his arm under the front of the Queen's car, right under it, up to the shoulder, reaching for something the rest of us still could not see. And when he pulled his arm back out, no, I won't tell you yet. Because I have to tell it the way it happened, and the way it happened, none of us knew. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 years, we only saw a guard on the ground reaching under the Queen's car, and a palace exploding into motion behind him, and a Queen's face appearing at the window, and the whole careful machine of Fenmore coming apart at the seams. I'll tell you what he pulled out in a moment. Just know this first. Know that I had watched that boy for months and read him true off his boots, a young man who does the work when nobody is watching. And know that everything about to happen, all the tension, all the fury inside those walls, all of it, turned on whether the men in the gray suits could see what I already knew about him. Let me go back to the boy on the ground. His arm was under the car up to the shoulder. His cheek was flat on the cold road. And the man in the gray suit, I know now his name was Harwood, master of the household, the man who runs the whole clockwork of the palace. Harwood had reached him and had a hand on his collar and was hauling at him and saying words I won't repeat because they were the kind of words you don't expect inside those gates. And the boy said one thing back, quiet. I only caught it because the whole street had gone silent. There's a child under the car. Harwood stopped pulling. I felt the words go through the crowd like cold water. A child, there's a child. 20 languages again, but the fear the same in all of them. And then the boy drew his arm back out from under the car, slow, so careful, the way you draw a splinter from a baby's hand, and there was a little girl in it. I will try to tell you what she looked like, but I don't think I have the words, and I've had years to find them. She could not have been more than 4. She was small even for that. She had dark hair matted flat on one side where she'd been lying, and she was wearing a thin cotton dress that had been another color once, and no coat in October. And this is the part I saw before anyone because I look at feet, she had no shoes. Bare feet filthy, one heel scraped raw. Bare feet in the cold, under the Queen's car. She wasn't crying. That was the worst of it. A crying child you can bear, because a crying child is a child who still expects the world to come. She was silent, and her eyes were huge and flat and gone somewhere far away, and she just let the boy lift her out and hold her against his chest like she weighed nothing, because to her, holding on and being held were the same strangeness she had no name for. She had been under the car. She had, we pieced together later, crawled in there in the night or the early morning, under the parked car in the row, into the warm dark near the engine, the way a cat does, the way any small cold creature does, and she had fallen asleep there, tucked up in the one warm place she could find in the whole cold city. And nobody had known. The driver hadn't known. She had been under a moving car, the Queen's own car, and in about 4 more feet of rolling she would have been under the wheels of it. The careful boy had seen her. That's what his eyes had been doing all morning down that service road. Not once, not twice, 4 times, 5, 6 that I'd counted. He'd caught some flicker of movement under those parked cars, a foot, a bit of pale dress, I don't know what hours before, and he had stood in his box with the rules screaming at him to stay, stay. You do not move, and he had watched and he had waited. And the second the wheels turned toward that child, he had thrown the whole of himself in the way. He had known. He had known and could not prove it, could not point, could not break, until the very last instant when knowing was the only thing left that mattered. I told you his boots were honest. I told you he did the work when nobody was watching. Now here is where the trouble started, the real trouble, because you would think a child saved, everyone weeps, the boy's a hero, the end. That's the story you'd want. That is not what happened next, not at first. What happened next was that Fenmore Palace, that beautiful, terrible machine, went into a kind of panic that had nothing to do with the little girl at all. You have to understand how those men think. Harwood and his gray suits. To them the whole world is a thing that could go wrong in front of the cameras. And here, in front of 200 cameras and a crowd from 30 countries, one of Her Majesty's guards had broken his post, had shouted, had run at the Queen's car, had thrown himself on the ground in the road. To half that crowd, for those first few seconds before the word child spread, it had looked like an attack. It had looked like a guard gone mad, lunging at his own queen. And that, the look of it, the picture of it, a guard breaking on the Queen's own doorstep, that was the thing Harwood could not forgive. I watched it play out. I had come to the railing by then, forgotten box and brushes behind me, hands on the cold iron with everyone else. They got the Queen out of the car and back toward the steps, 3 men around her hurrying, and she was letting them hurry her, but her head was turned the whole time back over her shoulder, looking at the boy and the child, looking hard, taking it in. She is not a foolish woman. She has been queen 50 years. She misses nothing. And Harwood had the boy by the arm and was marching him. And the child still in his arms, he would not give her up. And 2 staff were trying to take her, and he had turned his shoulder to them like a dog with something precious, marching all of them in through the gate and out of our sight, and his voice carrying back, and the words carrying back, insubordination and post and procedure, and never in my 40 years, and I remember thinking, cold in my stomach, they are going to break him for this. They were, I could feel it. In the world of the gray suits, the boy had committed the one unforgivable sin. Not that he'd been wrong, he'd been righter than any of them, but that he'd been seen being right in a way that made the palace look out of control. And a machine like Fenmore will grind a good man to powder to protect the look of the thing. I'd watched it happen to smaller men over smaller sins for 30 years. The gates closed. The crowd was left outside, buzzing, half of them already telling the story wrong to each other. The cameras kept rolling on the closed gate as if it might open again and explain itself. I stood there a long time, longer than made sense. My knees ached and the afternoon was coming on cold and I had a corner to work, but I couldn't make myself leave. I kept seeing the girl's bare feet. I kept seeing the boy's face when the door behind it blew open. And I'll tell you the strange thing that happened then, the thing that let me see the rest of this story instead of just guessing at it from outside the fence. A man came out of the small door beside the great gate, not gray suit, livery, palace household, but lo, a footman by his coat, and he came straight across to me, to old Alden the bootblack, and I thought he'd come to tell me to clear my mess of brushes off the royal pavement. He didn't. He crouched down by me and he said, "Lo, you saw it from the start. You were watching Wren before it happened." I said I was. He said, "Master Harwood is saying the corporal broke without cause, that he panicked, that there was no telling the child was there, and the corporal simply lost his nerve, and it's luck, not judgment, that saved the day. He's saying it upstairs right now." I felt my old heart go hard in my chest. "That's a lie," I said. "I know it's a lie," said the footman. "I've known that boy since he came, But it's Harwood's word inside those walls, and Harwood wants him gone, and there's nobody in that room who was standing where you were standing. He looked at me. You'd been watching him a long while before the car moved, hadn't you? An hour, I said. His eyes kept going to that road, 5, 6 times. He knew something was down there long before that car turned. He wasn't panicking, son. He was the only calm man on this whole street. He was waiting till the last second because he had no way to prove it and every way to be punished. And when the wheels moved, he chose the child over his own skin without a heartbeat's pause. I read men for a living. I have never in my life read one truer than that boy this morning. The footman looked at me a good while. Then he said, "Would you say that upstairs?" And that, friends, is how an old bootblack came to be walking through the gate of Fenmore Palace for the first time in 31 years, in his shining apron, with his heart going like a drum, to stand in a warm gold room in front of the men who were about to decide the fate of the best young man I ever met. I'll tell you about that room in a moment. But first I want you to sit with the picture the way I had to. A silent little girl with bare feet, safe now, somewhere inside those walls, given warm milk by some kind maid, not understanding a single thing that had happened around her. And a young corporal in a stained uniform, standing at attention in a corridor somewhere, waiting to be told whether the finest thing he ever did had cost him everything. And nobody in the room that mattered had seen what I had seen. I have never in my life been inside a room like that one. I've shined the boots of men who owned rooms like that, but I'd never stood in one. Gold on the ceiling, a carpet so deep and soft I felt like I was standing on a lie, a great long table, and around it the gray suits and a few uniforms with more braid than sense, and at the head of it in her deep blue coat still, the Queen. They had not made her wait to change or rest. She had refused, I learned. She had sat straight down in that room and said this would be settled now today, while the truth of it was still warm. The boy was there, Corporal Wren, standing at attention against the far wall, eyes front, that closed door face on again, hands at his sides and his beautiful boots scuffed and gray with road dirt and one knee of his trousers torn through. He did not look at me when I came in. He didn't look at anyone. He'd gone somewhere behind his own eyes to wait for the blow to fall. Harwood was mid-sentence when I entered, and he stopped, and he looked at me, an old man in an apron with a brush still somehow in his hand. I hadn't even known I was holding it, and the contempt on his face could have stripped paint. "What," he said, "is this?" The footman spoke up, braver than I'd have been. "The bootblack from the east corner, sir. He witnessed the whole of it, from before it began." "A bootblack," said Harwood. And here is the thing about that word, the way he said it. He meant it to end me. He meant it to make everyone in that gold room look at my apron and my brush and my ruined old knees and decide I was nothing, that whatever came out of my mouth was worth nothing. And a small voice, clear, dry, from the head of the table said, "Everyone in this room has been dressed by servants their whole lives, Harwood, and not one of us has ever once looked at the people who kept us clean. Perhaps that is exactly why we can't see straight this afternoon. Let the man speak." "The Queen." Harwood shut his mouth. I don't remember all of what I said. My knees were shaking, but I remember I did not talk about heroism because I knew that would sound like a story and the gray suits eat stories for breakfast. I talked about what I know. I talked about shoes. I told them I'd watched that boy for 8 months and never once seen him take a shortcut on the parts of his own boots that no visitor would ever see. I told them what that meant, that here was a young man who did the work when there was no one to praise him for it, which is the only true test of a man there is. I told them a boy like that does not panic. A boy like that does not break. I told them I had been watching his eyes go to that service road 5 and 6 times over the course of an hour, long before any car moved, and that a panicking man does not watch one spot patiently for an hour. A panicking man's eyes go everywhere. His went to one place, because he'd seen something in one place, and he'd been carrying the terrible weight of knowing without proof, and choosing to wait, and hopping to God he was wrong. He wasn't waiting to be a hero, I said. He was praying he was mistaken so he wouldn't have to break the rule you're going to hang him for. And when the moment came that being wrong meant a child died, he threw himself away without a thought. That's not a man who lost his nerve, Your Majesty. That is the steadiest man I have watched in 31 years on that corner, and I have watched a great many. The room was very quiet. Harwood recovered first. He would. It's a moving account, he said, in the voice men use when they mean the opposite. But sentiment is not procedure. The fact remains that Corporal Wren abandoned his post in full view of the public and the world's press and lunged at Her Majesty's vehicle. Whatever the outcome, we cannot have guards deciding for themselves when the rules apply to them. Discipline is not discipline if it bends for a good story. If we excuse this, every guard on that line will believe his own judgment outranks his orders. That is the end of the whole institution. I am sorry for it, but the corporal cannot remain. And do you know, he wasn't entirely wrong. That's the cruel thing. That's what made it a real reckoning and not a fairy tale. There was a truth in what Harwood said. Discipline that bends for a good enough reason isn't discipline. The whole reason those boys can be trusted at that gate is that they do not decide. Harwood was defending something that actually matters. And I saw the boy, against the wall, close his eyes, because he knew it too. He'd broken the rule with his own hands, and he wasn't going to stand there and pretend he hadn't. The Queen was silent a long time. Then she stood. Everyone made to stand with her, and she waved it down. She walked, slow, certain, the ground agreeing to be there, down the length of that room to the wall where the boy stood at attention. She stopped in front of him. She is not a tall woman. She had to look up at him. "Corporal Wren," she said, "look at me." He opened his eyes and looked at his queen. "When you left your post this morning," she said, "did you know you would likely lose it?" A long pause, then low, "Yes, ma'am." "You knew, and you went anyway?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" And the boy, the closed door, the steady one, the one who'd stood silent through an hour of the worst waiting a man can do, the boy's face came apart at last. Not into panic, into grief. Some old grief, older than that morning, that I understood the shape of but never the whole of. "Because I could see her, ma'am," he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle of it. "And nobody else could, and I couldn't stand there and be still and let it happen just because being still was the rule. I've stood still my whole life while he stopped himself, swallowed. I couldn't stand still for that, not for a child, whatever it cost. I'm sorry, ma'am, I'd do it again. God help me, I'd do it 100 times again." The room held its breath. And the Queen, 50 years a queen, who misses nothing, reached up and put one old hand flat against that boy's dirty, torn uniformed chest, right over his heart, the way you'd steady something you loved. "Harwood," she said without turning around, "you are right about discipline. You are entirely right, and I want it on the record that you were right, because a man who is only ever wrong is easy to ignore, and you are not that man." She paused. "But you have made one error, and it is the same error you made about our bootblack when he walked in. You have decided that the rule is the thing we are protecting. It is not. The rule is protecting the thing. And the thing is this," and she pressed her hand a little harder against the boy's heart, "a person willing to lose everything he has, in an instant without being told, to keep a child from dying under the wheels of my car. That is what the guard at my gate is for. He did not fail the meaning of his post this morning, Harwood. He is the only one of us who understood it." She turned around then, and looked down the room at all of them. "He will not be dismissed," she said. "He will not be disciplined. When he is fit, he will return to his post, and the record will show a commendation, not a charge. And the next time we are tempted to believe that the rule and the reason for the rule are the same thing, I would like every man in this room to remember a little girl with no shoes on, asleep under a car in the cold, and the one person on that whole street who chose her over himself." Nobody spoke. The boy was crying, silent, at attention, not moving to wipe it, because he was still a guard, and a guard does not move. And the queen looked at him, and something almost like a smile touched her. "At ease, corporal," she said gently. "Just this once, you've earned the right to move." And he did. He put his face in his hands and he wept, and no one in that gold room thought a single thing the less of him for it. I'll tell you the small things, because it's the small things that stay. The child's name was Wren. Nobody had known it that morning. She told it to a kitchen maid over warm bread that afternoon, the first word she'd said. Wren, like the little brown bird that's braver than anything its size has a right to be. They found where she'd come from, a hard story, the kind I won't spread, a mother lost and no one left who was supposed to be looking. And I will only tell you that the queen took a personal interest, and that a small girl who slept under a car for warmth in October did not sleep cold again after that. That's all I'll say. It's all you need. The boy went back to his post 3 weeks later, boots shining like prayer, heel and all. And me, well, I went back to my corner, box, stool, 3 worn brushes, I shine boots, that's what I do. But sometimes, on a gray October morning, when the leaves are coming down in their slow spirals, and the chestnuts are on, and the tourists press up to the iron to stare at the still young men who will not move, sometimes I look across at the left box, at the careful one, standing like the stone behind him. And once, only once, when the crowd was thin and no one was near, his eyes came off the middle distance, just for half a second, and found me across the road. And this boy who is trained past all of us to give the world nothing, this boy gave me the smallest nod a man can give. I gave it back. Then he was stone again, and I was an old man with a brush, and the city went on the way it always has. People ask me, after all these years, how I can stand to do the same small thing on the same small corner, day after day, world without end. And I think of a boy who polished the part of his boots that no one would ever see. And I tell them, there's no such thing as a small thing. There's only the thing you do when nobody's watching. That's the whole of a man right there. That's all any of us ever really are.